Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Kaiulani Stanton, and I'm here in one of our little cabins on our farm near the Mississippi River in Illinois. I wish I were there with you guys, but I couldn't be. But I'm grateful to Chrissy and some of the other grandmothers for this opportunity to share my thoughts about storytelling. First of all, this is my best friend, Bear, and he's with me. I don't know if he'll stay with me, but he's napping right now, so hopefully he'll stick around. I don't know what I'd do without him. He keeps me company, he protects me, he lets me know when things are going on or not all right, and he lets me know when it's dinner time. So, I love the topic of storytelling, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to share what I do know about it. Um, I grew up in a situation where storytelling was part of the fabric of my life as a little child. We had twins in our family, twin children. They were 3.5 years younger than me, my brother and sister. And so bedtime was a great time for me. My mom would put the little kids to bed, and I would have my dad. And we'd start out in the evening with he and I at the kitchen table. I'd be at the kitchen table, he'd be washing dishes, and he'd be putting me through my times table, and that part I just couldn't stand. But after that, that's when the fun began. And he'd go upstairs with me, and I got to have my choice every night. And I could either have songs, which I loved from a big old songbook, and or I could have story time. And I loved the stories. My dad was a psychologist, and at the time I didn't realize it, but he was teaching me. So I'd have all kinds of indigenous stories from different cultures and backgrounds. I'd also have the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen, but all of them had a point because that's how stories are. They teach, they preserve history, they carry medicine, they encapsulate the medicine with all the things that are preserved there. And so it's really important that we look at storytelling as fun, because it is, and it should be fun, but also as a very important way to bring the teachings of the people to the world. So I'm going to start out with a couple of stories. One of them I heard at a fire in Arizona, up in the mountains at a camp that we went to every year for families. It was put on by the tribe and the Indian elders and youth out of Bozeman, Montana. Anyway, so this one particular story was told by a woman that I will always honor and respect as a grandmother to me. Her name was Priscilla V. Hill. Her daughter is Vicki Downey, who comes often to the United Nations. And Priscilla would come every year and stay at our house, and it was one of the high points of my life. And I remember one night she was at the fire and the firelight flickering on her face, and she was a little lady physically, but a fantastically powerful storyteller. So she shared this story. Once upon a time, there was a mother coyote, and she had a little den up in the mountains, up in the cliff, and in the den were her babies. Well, she'd been out hunting one day, and she came back home and trotted up the path to home and went into her den, and the little babies came running toward her. Mother, mother, we're thirsty. Can we have a drink? So she said, sure. So she ran down the path to the river, crossing under the little mesquite bushes and a big tree, and scooped up her mouth full of water and started back. As she came out under the tree, she looked up and she heard a sound. There were all these little birds sitting on a branch. Chitty, chitty, chitty. She looked. They were so cute. She started laughing and all the water fell out of her mouth. Ah, she said, and she turned around and trotted back to the river and again filled her mouth up and headed back, went through the mesquite and under the tree branch, and sure enough, there they were. Chitty, chitty, chitty. There went that water down on the ground. Now she's getting irritated. So she stomped back, filled her mouth, and decided to take another way. And as she did, she didn't realize that because those birdies were on the branch high up, they could see what she was doing. They figured out her strategy. And so they swooped over and landed in the bushes ahead of her on the new trail. And as she came through there, chitty, 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 There went the water. Now she was really mad. So she stomped back, went down to the stream, filled her mouth, and then picked some of the leaves, the sharp leaves like needles, from the yucca bush, and stuck them through her lips like sewing. And this time she was sure that that water would stay there. She went back through the mesquite and under the branch, to-chitty, ow, 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 as the water fell out. Shaking her head, she said, "That's enough," stomped back up, went into her den, and all her little babies had died. Well, the way I did this was whenever I heard a new story, I'd type it out and send it to my daughter. And she would get the stories and she would read them to my grandchildren, Ted and Maya. Well, this was no exception, but she was mad at me. She sent me an email and she said, "Mom, I can't believe you did that." She said, "You killed all the puppies off." She said, "It's a good thing I can read faster than I can talk." She said, "Because I changed the ending. So they were all living happily ever after." I said, "Oh, really? Well, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about what it was that caused you to change the ending. Because the reason for that story is to remind mothers that they have to be very careful, that they don't stay too long away from the family to laugh and play, because they need to laugh and play at home with the babies. Maybe she should have taken them with her to the stream." So that's how it is with stories, especially our indigenous stories that have been passed from generation to generation. That's why they were entrusted to the people who are indigenous to begin with, because they honor perpetuity and exactness when it comes to medicine, because they know that they're accountable to the elders. So one of the elements about the storytelling process is you always acknowledge whose story it is. Where'd you get it? If you made it up, that's fine. You don't have to say too much, but if it was given to you, handed to you, it's always important not to change it, to keep it the way it is, but to let people know where it came from. So another story that I really love, I got once at a tribal council training, and it was a training of trainers, and I loved this woman that was the teacher, one of the modules. She was a Lakota attorney, and she was teaching us in a way that I love to learn. One of them was with stories. So she had a story about a man who woke up one morning in his home in the North Woods up in Lake Country, where the perpetuity of the tribe depended upon fishing and hunting, but primarily fishing. So one day this man in the prime of his life came out in the morning and went down to the stream for his bath. When he was finished, he smudged himself and did his prayers and went out to the forest looking for the perfect tree, which he found. He smudged the tree, put his hands on it, prayed, thanked it, and from a little pouch at his side, he took a wooden peg, a small, thin peg, probably about 6 inches long, I guess, I don't know for sure, and pounded it into the perfect spot in that tree. Then he went home and went on with his business. A few months later, the same thing. He got up, took his bath, smudged, went to the same tree, prayed, and found a spot just above the one he'd already pounded in, and pounded that peg in. A couple months later, he did the same, and on and on and on and on and on, until one day, a very old man, he died. A couple months later, his son, now in the prime of his life, woke up, came out, did the same thing his father had done year after year, and found the tree, put in the peg right past where his father had put the last one, and continued the same process every couple of months, year after year. Until one day, nobody was there, just his tree, and there was a huge cracking sound. The tree split open, and a perfect, beautiful canoe fell out. Because the canoe was the sustainer of life, and And even though the first man knew, when he pounded the first peg, that he wasn't going to be there himself on the day that the canoe fell out, his grandchildren were going to be there, and they would need to eat. And so this is the way it works. We are not going to necessarily be there for the end of the project that we've begun, but the important part is that we started it. And if for some reason we can't finish, someone else will invariably come along, because that's what perpetuity is. And so the storytelling is a process in and of itself. And so as we tell these stories, there's a reason for them. And that reason goes beyond who we are and what we're doing. And it encapsulates a message and a teaching. So I'm going to tell a Hawaiian story now. This one is, you may have heard it. It's a pretty popular story, but its message is timeless. And it's the story of a young man named Maui. And Maui was someone who really loved his mother. And he admired her and respected her because she'd get up and she would begin working before daylight, and she would work until after dark. But he could hear her. Oh, 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 if only the day was longer. Why does the sun have to go so fast? I have so much to do and so little time. And Maui took that really seriously. He worried about his mom because he knew that she had a lot to do. One of the main things that she did was she would weave their mats. And she would, to do that, go up into the mountains to the pandanus tree and take the long, thin leaves, pluck them, and they were pretty sharp, and take them down to the sea, where she would soak them in the seawater in a tidal pool until they were soft. And then she'd work them until they were long strips and let them dry. And then she would begin her weaving. But again, oh, 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 the time goes by too fast. I need a longer day. Why is the sun going so quickly? So one day Maui said, that's enough. I'm going to help my mother. So he went to see his grandmother, and she gave him an idea. So he went into the forest and he cut some vines, and he made a long rope, and he climbed up to the top of the mountain, and he hid behind a rock. And that morning, when the sun came up out of the ocean, he took his vine rope and he swung it over his head and shot that lasso out over the sea and caught the sun. And quickly, before the sun could get away, he tied the sun to the rock. What are you doing? What are you doing? Called out the sun, wiggling and pulling and mad. Let me go, he said to Maui. Maui said, no, I'm not going to let you go. My mom needs more time during the day. You're going to have to slow down so that she can get her work done. She's making pandanus mats. She's making her mats. You need to give her more time. So, the sun wiggled, pulled against that rope, cried, cursed, did everything he could. And Maui said no. And then finally, the sun appealed to Maui's kind heart. And he said, Maui, remember, your mother's here, but on the other side of the world, there are other mothers who need to get their lauhala mats made too. And so I have to go. I can't stay here forever. They need to have daylight as well, because when I'm not there, it's dark. So Maui considered that, and he was a really good boy. And he understood exactly what the sun was saying, and he didn't want to be selfish. So he made a deal with the sun that half of the year, the sun would take his time, and he would give Maui's mom more time to be able to get her work done. But the other half of the year, he would go quickly. And this would be the same on the other side of the world as well. And so today, that's the way it is. In the wintertime, our days are short, and in the summertime, they're long, and we all get our work done. So, I have another story. And this one is a story about a little boy. And it's about a little boy who I met one day when I was in Arizona on a really, really, really hot day. And this little boy was riding his bike, and he had his dog, and his dog was running along behind him. And they got to the market, and I was going in, and I did my things and came back out, and there's that little dog, and he was so hot, and his little feet were hurting him, and he was out there jumping from foot to foot, trying to keep from burning them on the pavement. And the little boy came out, and I said to him, "Your dog's feet are so hot. You've got to be able to pay attention to what your little dog needs because he loves you. You need to take your dog home. And on hot days like this, maybe he shouldn't come out with you because he'll go wherever you want him to go. He loves you. So you've got to be the one to watch out for him." So that little boy got on his bike and he rode off, the little dog running behind him. Well, a long time went by, a couple months anyway, and I didn't know the little boy. I'd never seen him before, and I didn't see him again until one day I was at a classroom and I was doing some storytelling, and I told about the time that I had to get up on stage with the lady, Denise Alley, a wonderful storyteller, Otaw and Cherokee, and Omaha, I think. Anyway, we were talking, and we had to do the Four Directions Blessing. Only problem was neither of us knew where the east was. We were under an arbor, and we couldn't really see, and we were trying to figure out, let's see, what direction is it? And fortunately, we did figured it out, and went from there. Well, afterwards, after I'd done all the talking, this little boy came up, and it was the same little boy with the dog. And he was telling me about his dog. He said, "Do you remember me? I had my little dog." And I said, "Oh, yeah, hi. I'm sorry, I forgot who you were, but I see you now." And the little boy said that his mom had made shoes for the dog. When he got home, he told his mom what I'd said, and so she made little shoes for the dog. And so now, he said, whenever I take my dog out and it's a hot day, we put his shoes on him. And he said, "So I want to share something with you." This was the most darling little native boy. He said, "Whenever you have to do a blessing," he said, "just remember this. Never eat soggy waffles. North, east, south, west. Never eat soggy waffles." He says, "and you'll never not know." And I thought, oh my gosh, this was brilliant. Brilliant. And so I learned a powerful lesson. First of all, the storytelling is a gift. The story is the gift. The teller is the giver of the gift. And it doesn't have to be a grandmother like me or a wise old man. It could be just the tiniest child, or it could be a dog. The wind can tell stories. I remember one time we were in Poland, northern Poland, doing a gathering of grandmothers at a retreat center in the forest. And before I left home, I have a wonderful woman, Jess, who is a seer, a visionary. And whenever the grandmothers would go anywhere, I would check with Jess just before I left, and she would tell me what she could see lying ahead for us. So this one trip, she had told me that when you're in Poland, you're going to be in a forested area, and you're going to need to be really careful. And I said, okay. Got to Poland. Everywhere you look are forested areas. And so I was careful for the whole trip. This was the very last place that we were scheduled to be at, and we were out there in this beautiful place. And our storytelling place, our teaching place, was a yurt down at the bottom of a hill right next to the woods. And it held probably 40 people, 35 people, and we were down there, and it was our third and last day, and we're wrapping up, getting ready to wrap up. And all of a sudden, and I was thinking, whoa, this is great. Nothing happened. And now it's time to go back home. And this is perfect. Well, no sooner had I had that thought when some loud voices started going off on the side in the woods. And we all were silent because the voices were really angry. And a man and woman came out, and they were holding their little pails for collecting mushrooms, and they were fighting. And they were mad. And they were speaking Polish. I don't know what they were saying, but I recognized that feeling. And they came out of the woods, and everybody was silent, and they were so furious. And the one man in the yurt with us started to stand up. I'd asked him to be our protector from the beginning. Always there was a protector that would appear no matter where we were at all of our gatherings. And I asked him if he would have that role with us for those days. And so he started to stand up. But the wind had just blown by me, and it had whispered to me that everything was going to be fine. And so I motioned to him that we didn't have to worry about it. And he sat back down again. Well, the couple went past us, still arguing and fighting. And with 35 to 40 people in there, they never saw any of us sitting. And we all just sat quiet silence while they went by. They went up the little hill, and we heard their truck start up, and they left. And so we went ahead and we finished our meeting. I was so happy. Yay, it's done. Yay, we didn't have to worry anymore. Now we can go on. And the wind had told me that all would be well. Don't worry. So when it was all over, we went back and got our things, and we were loading the cars, and we were down to maybe 8 cars in the parking lot, and all white-haired grandmas. And one of the grandmothers came up to me and said, Susan, this man wants to talk to you. And I looked at the man, and he was clearly unstable. And I looked around, and there were no one there but grandmothers. And I took him by the arm and started to walk away. And I said, what can I do for you? And he was just looking around all over the place, clearly agitated, very upset. I held on to his arm. And as I did, I was massaging it and talking to him. And I asked him what he was doing, what he had to say. Did you want to talk to me about? And he said that he had been in his bedroom in Spain watching TV. And he said a South American shaman had come into his room the night before and told him that America was evil and it was going to destroy the world. And then on TV was a little thing saying that the grandmothers, the Native American grandmothers, were going to be in Poland. And so he came up from Spain. It was a 2-day drive, but he came up because he wanted to confront me and ask me about this. Is this true? What can you do about it? And I had been walking him away from the other grandmothers to keep them safe until I figured out what was going on. And so we were now standing at the edge of a cliff. And I was thinking, I don't know if this is the best spot to be with this guy because he was obviously agitated. But as we talked and he began to relax a little bit, I started asking him some questions. And I asked him if he had any children. Yes, he said, I have a little boy. He said, but he won't live with me. He said, I had a job, but the man didn't pay me. And so I lost our house. And now I don't have my little boy, and I'm all by myself. And he started to cry. And my heart just went out to him. And I said to him, look. And I pointed up into the sky. And I said, do you see it? And he said, what? I'm looking in the sky. I said, that's the future. Do you see that? City of lights. I said, it's coming. This beautiful time and this place of peace. And it's going to come no matter what. And there's not anybody, not a country, a government, or even a man who hires you for a job who can keep that peace from coming. But you have to get ready. And so why don't you go back home and find somebody who can help you so that you can get yourself straightened out again and get a good job this time. And you know what? It's coming. You're going to find it. It's going to be just the right job. Get the help that you need, and your little boy will trust you again and come back home. And he looked at me and he was so happy because there had been a solution to what he was feeling. And he hugged me and he thanked me and he got in his car and drove off. And that's true. That's true. So the story doesn't require a lot of preparation time. It doesn't require memorizing. It's just a matter of knowing who you are and knowing what the truth is and realizing that there are 1,000 ways that we can convey that. But the best of all possible ways for me is to be able to share it in a story. So the story encapsulates the teaching, the history. It preserves for the future the things that we're going to need to have so that we can make it through both hard times and good times, because storytelling is fun too. So my very final thing that I have to say about storytelling took place at a fire up in the Gila Wilderness, where we went to do our Humblecha, our Vision Quest every year. And at night, we would gather around by the fire while the fasters were out on the hill for their 4 days. Well, my husband is a great storyteller, Brad Walking Bear. He's a Narragansett Indian from the East Coast, and he's a fisherman, a 30-year lobster fisherman, and he's got some great stories, but his stories are scary. He loves to tell scary stories. So we're out there in the wilderness, and we've got the fire, and we've got all these kids there, and they're listening to Brad, and he's telling his stories about the time the boat sank, and the time he got knocked overboard, and the time he had to fly out in a helicopter, which was more than once, and all these different stories. And then he started on a scary story, and I'm always getting upset with him when he does that, because they really are scary. So he starts out and he says, "It was a dark, dark night, just like tonight, in a place up in the mountains, just like this, at a fire, just like ours. And you know what? There was a sound way over there." And he looks at this boy and he says, "Over there, right where your tent is now, there was a noise in the night, right there." And then he went on, and it was time to go to bed. And the little boy, all the boys left, everybody, all the kids went back home. And the next morning we were sitting out there by the fire, and this irate dad comes stomping out, went up to Brad and said, "My kid was up all night because of you and your stories." He says, "What were you thinking, telling all these stories?" Yelled at Brad, stormed off. And Robert, who was our lodge keeper and our fire keeper, he laughed and he said to Brad, "You know what, Brad? That was the most fun that kid ever had." So stories can be just for fun, and they can have tremendous meaning. And my dog, as I said, is probably one of the best storytellers I ever met. So with that, I'm going to wrap it all up, and I'm going to say thank you to everybody for being here and listening to me. And as I said, I wish I were there. I know you're going to have a wonderful time. You probably already are. I have no doubt. But the women are the storytellers, in my opinion, because the men throw in some stuff that maybe we don't need. I don't know. So Brad and I are always going at it in our dueling storytelling. But the truth is that that's the greatest way that we have to share what we know. So with that, continue to have a wonderful time, and I'm glad that we had this chance to talk. Aho mitakiasi. Aloha keakua kuleana. Goodbye.